and welcome to Tech to Tech presented by KaiZen, where we will explore common cleaning questions and answers. Let's get started. I would like to introduce KaiZen's own Carolyn Leary.
Thanks, William. I am Safety Data Sheet Coordinator here at KaiZen Corporation, and today we're going to continue our series on understanding SDSs with part 4, and we're going to dig deeper into sections 4 through 9. We'll start with a quick recap of things we learned in parts 1 through 3. You can go back to KaiZen's Tech to Tech YouTube channel if you'd like to catch up on those. As we said before, the GHS SDS is a relatively brief document that follows a well-defined format outlining the hazards of a chemical and provides guidelines on the proper handling, storage, and shipping of that material. The GHS guidelines define a very specific way to classify a material and how to report the hazards and the severity of those in a safety data sheet and on the label. The GHS SDS has 16 sections, and last time we looked at sections 1, 2, and 3. So just to go over these again real quickly, so it blends in with what I'm going to talk about today. Section 1 is the identification of the substance or mixture and the supplier. So here you will find the name of the product identifier, its recommended use, or if there's restrictions, the manufacturer or supplier that's offering this product to market. And this should include an address and phone number and a way to contact them if you have any questions on their safety data sheet. And then lastly, in section 1, there should be an emergency telephone number uh, in case of spills or accidents for this material. Section 2 identifies the hazards. And here you'll see the GHS classification of the substance or mixture, if there is one. Also, we'll find the pictograms, signal word, precautionary phrases, and hazard statements that we talked about in part 3. And if there's any other hazards that aren't necessarily part of GHS, but are important for a user to know. And then lastly, in section 3, this talks about the composition or information on the ingredients. And here, if it's a single component chemical, it will have its identification number, CAS number, things like that. And if it's a mixture, here you'll find at minimum the hazardous components of that mixture that are present at or above specified cutoff limits. So moving on, today we're going to look at sections 4 through 9. These include first aid measures, firefighting, accidental release measures, how to handle and store it, exposure controls or personal protection, and physical chemical properties. So let's dig into these a little bit more. Section 4 are first aid measures. Now here, it's going to start out with things that can be done by the first person on the scene in case of an exposure. It's divided into how the person may have come in contact with it. Did they inhale it? Did they swallow it? Get it on their skin or eyes? And information here should be what a person can do without having special medical training or needing special equipment. What can be done right away to help a person who's gotten some of this on them or in them. It should be highlighted here very clearly if special medical attention is needed. That should become very obvious. And it also should be noted here before first responders get there if they need special equipment, such as a suit or special breathing apparatus. Under here, section 4.2 are the most important symptoms and effects, both acute and delayed. And so acute are those things that are going to happen immediately or within, say, the first hour, such as things like loss of consciousness or a rash, information that'll be important to know here. And delayed symptoms, unfortunately, generally are things that may be a little bit more hazardous, such as will this tend to target a specific organ, possibly even causing birth defects or worse. And 4.3, this is information that may be more important for the medical um, personnel that are going to treat your exposure victim. Are there things they need to know, such as are there anecdotes or things that they definitely need to avoid when treating a patient who has been exposed to this chemical? Now, not every chemical that has a safety data sheet will have severe hazards. And just as we've mentioned before, uh, you can't delete the section. Each safety data sheet should have um, 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3. But if there's no known hazards, just a simple phrase is acceptable to be listed here, stating that um, no hazards known or um, not applicable, but they have to keep the segment there just so that the user knows they didn't forget it. Moving on to section 5, these are firefighting measures. The first one is list proper extinguishing media, how to put out this fire, what's the best methods, but also are there unsuitable techniques that should be avoided? For example, should high pressure fire extinguishers be avoided because they can spread the fire rather than merely just putting it out? 5.2 are special hazards arising from um, this chemical or mixture burning. For example, will it produce toxic vapors such as carbon monoxide and the like? And then section 5.3 is advice specifically for firefighters. Do they need to be aware of special gear? Should they have self-contained breathing masks and tanks, particular turnout gear? And then also, should they be aware to keep the containers cool um, with water spray? Section 6 are accidental release measures and what needs to be done in case this gets on the ground and poured out. Section 6.1 are personal precautions, protective equipment, and emergency procedures. These apply both to non-emergency personnel, people right at the scene, and also for emergency responders. Are there special personal protective gear requirements or safety requirements? Things like making sure to turn off sources of ignition. Do people responding to a spill need to have particle masks or um, self-contained breathing apparatus and things of that nature? 6.2 are the environmental precautions. Is this material relatively benign and just needs to be diluted with a lot of water? Or do we need to put up berms or dams to block this from going down drains or getting into soil and groundwater? And 6.3 are the methods and materials that will provide for containment and cleanup. Special absorbent materials preferred should the product be neutralized or other forms of decontamination. Um, should these methods be taken? And then are there things that should be avoided uh, while cleaning up this material? And in section 6.4, the guideline have allowed, rather than repeating information that's found elsewhere in a safety data sheet, here they list uh, the sections where to go to. For example, going to section 8 for personal protective gear that's relative to this product, or section 13, which we'll discuss later. It talks about the proper way to dispose of the materials after you've cleaned up the spill. Section 7 is how to handle and store the material. 7.1 talks about the precautions for safe handling. Um, this draws attention to incompatibilities, for examples, not storing acids and bases together. Um, do we need to wear gloves when handling the product? Hygiene advice, for example, wash your hands after use, don't smoke in the area, things of that nature. 7.2 are the conditions for safe storage, again, including any incompatibilities. This is mostly for the structure where you're storing it. Um, are there guidelines for dangerous conditions? For example, again, s- keeping in mind flammability hazards, ignition sources, explosive environments. Is it incompatible with other materials? So do we need to be aware to keep it stored in a separate location? Under here, you'll also find out, are there weather or environmental effects that could cause problems with storage of the material? For example, will high humidity have an effect on the quality of this material? Keeping it out of the sunlight or excessive heat. Does it need to be refrigerated? Information like that will be found in section 7.2. And here, going along with that and above is special precautions that need to be taken to be sure that the material itself maintains its integrity. Uh, Special ventilation for the room, needs for retention walls in case of spilling, things of that nature. Section 7.3 goes along with, at the very beginning, we talked about what the specific use of the product was. So section 7.3 is here if there's more information on that specific use. More detail can be provided here for the user, and if they have test results, things like that, they can be added in this section. Section 8 are exposure controls and personal protection. Now, 8.1 is where you will find is if the chemical, if it's a single component, or the hazardous components, if the product is a mixture, if they have biological exposure limits that need to be monitored in the workplace, these will be found here. This provides the user and their company with understanding what each worker um, what they need to be aware of as far as their exposure for their workers. These should be relative to the country where the product is being used, as each country may have its own limits. But if the supplier does not have that information, but they have their own, as long as they list the source of the exposure levels in their information they're providing, that's acceptable. 8.2 are the exposure controls. This again should complement your section 7 as far as storage and handling. It provides additional information to the facility and for the user on an individual level. Here you'll find things such as is a ventilation exhaust needed or required? Should the product be used in a spray booth or with special handling devices so that it can reduce human contact? Um, and lastly, are there specific personal protective equipment requirements? Do we need special eye gear? Are skin coverings, clothing, special glove material recommendations will be found here as well. And section 9 are the physical and chemical properties. Now there's a lot of properties here. The GHS guideline has selected 18 as the minimum that need to be listed in section 9. It's while all these properties should be listed, it's not necessary that you will find information for each of them. In some cases, they may not apply. For example, pH wouldn't apply to a gas, but in when there is no data available or not applicable, the header should be there, for example, pH, with a simple statement saying not applicable, or if the supplier doesn't know the value, just stating it's not determined or no data available. The order that the properties appear is not fixed. It may be more feasible to list things in a different order, the ones that are applicable at the beginning altogether, or they're related to one another. They can be shifted around, and but they should all be there with or without information in them. Section 9.2 is other information. Uh, this is information that would provide be useful for safe handling, such as the product sensitive to shock, or if it's a solid and flammable, providing information on the burn rate and things of that nature. Um, Again, properties that are not included in the list above, but important when doing a risk assessment of that material in your facility. So in conclusion, I thought I'd pull this into how it might look in an actual safety data sheet. We're going to use the example of the chemical that we put together for the previous sections. And if we look at section 4 for that chemical, um, it talks about the first aid measures. Section 4.1 has them described by routes of exposure. You'll see after inhalation, a recommendation for how to treat that person, after skin contact, after eye contact, and after swallowing. Section 4.2 talks about effects acute and delayed. That's immediate, or delayed will be after more than an hour. In this case, there's no information available. And again, that's acceptable. We've not deleted that, even though we have no information here, but we've simply put a statement stating that there's no information available. And the same with section 4.3, um, special information for medical personnel and special treatments. Section 5 has the firefighting measures. Our product would be good with any suitable extinguishing materials for whatever surrounding area is there. It lists several that could be used in case of fire. Special hazards, there's no information available. And for the firefighters in section 5.3, there's no special equipment required on their part. Section 6 looks at the accidental release measures. Um, Again, personal protection and protective equipment. It says not required. That should be read to say no special equipment is required. Always follow proper personal protective gear. Um, Talks about environmental precautions, methods and materials for cleaning up. It gives some examples of acceptable materials. And then section 6.4 refers the user of the safety data sheet to the other sections for information on safe handling, again, PPE and disposal. Section 7 is the handling and storage, and it talks about, in this case, our product had very low hazards, so there's no special equipment or requirements needed for the material. Um, Safe storage, again, in this case, it's not very exciting, but in a lot of cases, that's good. There's no special um, facilities or equipment needed for it. Section 8 are the exposure controls and personal protection. You'll see the control parameters that the material doesn't contain any chemicals that have workplace exposure limits that need to be monitored. And then the exposure controls, you'll go down the list and you can see um, recommendations for hygiene, such as washing your hands before and after breaks, and respiratory protection, things of that nature. Eye protection, goggles recommended during filling. And then section 9, the physical properties, it has that list, and then either the value on the right-hand side or a description, and then if the value wasn't determined, again, we've not deleted it, it's still there, but we're just providing the information that um, there's no, um, it's either not applicable or the data is not there. So thank you for walking through sections 4 through 9 with me. In part 5 of our series, we're going to finish up the 16 sections with 10 through 16. And thank you for your attention. So now I'd like to address a couple of questions that are frequently asked on these topics. The first one is, why doesn't the SDS give all the physical properties if they're listed there? And as we said before, sometimes the property is just not applicable. Melting point of a gas, it's not a property that is going to have a value. So we can put not applicable, or the supplier manufacturer just may not know. and just to list um, not determined is acceptable in that case. The second question is, why are some SDSs so much longer than others? And what GHS has done is they provided a minimum guide for the user, for the author. Um, it provides the minimum information that they feel will give users, handlers, shippers the information they need to stay and use it and store it safely. But the authors definitely welcome to add more information if they feel like it'll provide clarity for using that material or additional um, useful information. They're not limited to the sections on the SDS. Okay, and the next question. With GHS, are SDSs for the same product the same in every country? And I've said this on my other talks in this series. It's important to know that no, um, they may not be, not necessarily be the same for each country. And the reason is that each country develops their own hazard communication program, and they choose to adopt GHS and which revision. And they also may have additional lists of chemicals they consider to be hazardous or have other hazards that need to be monitored. So it's always important to get the safety data sheet for the country where the product is being used. And I appreciate your time and attention today, and I will turn it back over to William. Thank you for watching.
Thanks, Carolyn. And thank you all for watching this Tech to Tech session. If you would like to discuss this topic further or have any questions not answered in the session, please contact your local Kaizen regional manager or send an email to tech@kaizen.com and we will have someone follow up with you as soon as possible. Do you want to have exclusive access to future content sent directly to your inbox, or do you know someone who would benefit from these sessions? If the answer is yes, just go to tech2tech.kaizen.com and fill out the subscription form. And if you like this video, be sure to follow us on our social media platforms for more expert cleaning content.